Hello and welcome to this Conversations on Groong episode. I want to remind our listeners that Hovik and I would like to read your thoughts and comments under our videos on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Groong. Today we want to talk about Armenia's economy in 2024. So we have with us former Minister of Finance of Armenia, Mr. Vardan Aramyan. Hello, Mr. Aramyan. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Asbed.
Ողջույն,
Hovik, and thanks for having me.
Let's start in a place where the news is not so bad, at least on paper, and from where most people's impressions come about their economy. Inflation. Armenia was subject to the same global inflationary currents as everyone else after the COVID pandemic and experienced 10+% inflation rates until early 2023. For most of 2024, reported inflation has been essentially zero, with the first 7 months recording a minus 0.3 inflation, so a slight amount of price deflation at the consumer level. The producer price index is at 2.8%, perhaps showing a modest amount of inflation in the pipeline. However, when you talk to people on the street, many would disagree that the economy is good, and they cite increased prices for food and other basic items as their reasons for not feeling a good economy. So what's your read of how Armenia is managing its inflation, Mr. Aramyan?
That's a very hot topic, to be frank, and already I was asked a similar question recently by different journalists. Actually, we need to approach this phenomena from 3 to 4 perspectives. Perspective number one, general approach of the consumers. And, in academic literature, you can find a lot of study that bad memories play a vital role. And mostly consumers, they have a propensity to remember price hikes rather than when the prices goes down. They immediately react when the price is going up, just looking at, the price of the bread goes up. And when it receded, when it goes down, still they have in their bad memories this price hike. That's why the first reaction when you just approach them and ask, what is your understanding about inflation? He or she says, there was a high prices and in high inflation. This is the one phenomenon. The second phenomena is usually, when always there's biases when you approach to the street and you ask about the inflation. The important aspect is to whom you make such kind of question and what is their judgment. So if in your sample, mostly it's a low and middle income households, they are much more vulnerable to the inflation rate. That's why their reaction is much more, progressive. These two factors, this is in a global sense. It's just usual in a global world. But I'm going to speak now about the next two factors, which is usual, and this is describing the Armenian reality. The first one is the type of the growth, whether it is inclusive growth or not. In 2022, when there was a shock and a lot of people visited from Russia and Ukraine to Armenia, there was a money transfer. This created some kind of inclusiveness because non-tradable sector, different spheres of the non-tradable sector increased, and that also it absorbs employment. And if you look to the unemployment rate goes down. However, if you look only the structure of the economic growth for 2024, we cannot state the same phenomena. And the whole economy is only based to one single factor, which leads this high economic growth. This is a re-export. I'm going to talk about this, which means that there is not much inclusiveness in this type of growth. You have economic growth, but just the multiplier effect is much more lower. Another, the most important factor that we need to consider here as that, we need to go back to 2018 and let's discuss what happens in 2018. By the way, in academic literature, you can find a lot of study about this kind of, let's say, street change of the power, Velvet Revolution, like some authors are calling. There are a lot of similarities, what happened in those countries. For instance, many academicians and scholars, they argue that in countries where per capita GDP That study had been done in 2012, 13, so you need to just adjust this per capita GDP. And their figure during that time was 12,000 to 30,000. Now you need to inflate it. So basically, in today's price, it should be around 18,000 or more. If in those countries whose per capita GDP on average is above these thresholds, strict types of revolution is very difficult to fulfill, and I'm going to explain it. When people appear in the street, on the street, actually they are divided in three categories. Category number one, which is 3 to 5% of the overall society or people that appears on the streets. Category number one, these are let's say aggressive sector, aggressive part of your society. Mostly their expectation is that they form during these kind of demonstrations is vendetta, because previously they were harmed with a social, they were faced with a social injustice or some kind of injustice. They had some kind of bad experience when they lost their businesses. So basically, what expectation they form, that expectation is vendetta. Another part of society that appeared on the streets is counted on average in these countries from 12 to 15%, not more. These are rationals or people forming rational expectation. And what they want while appearing on the street, they want reform. They want the government without any corruption and bureaucracy. They want the prosperity, the equality, etc., etc. These are society that much more, let's say, knowledgeable, that they want some changes, positive changes from this change. And the big part, usually, what was envisaged in different countries, it was in Latin America, in Ukraine, in Georgia, during the Rose Revolution. Big part, the most enormous part of the society that appeared on the street, authors they called gray part of the society. And this gray part, usually, these are people belonging to the middle and low income households part of your society. So therefore, extremely different expectation. And their expectation is they want to get up early in the morning and their salary should go up without doing anything. And their expectation is that, new government must do some kind of redistribution of wealth, just taking some wealth from the former businessmen or former wealthy people and redistribute among themselves. The expectation that they form is that they wanted to consume more. But because, that's just an economic thing. And by the way, that government usually fueled their expectation with their declaration. If you remember in 2018, what government or people on the street that leading this demonstration, what kind of promises they get. We are going to withdraw all your penalties. We are going to forgive all your credits. You will not pay any credit to the banks, etc., etc., right? And this kind of, they also fuel the expectation. So, and the big part, usually this society forms from 80 to 85% from the people appearing in the street. So this big part of the society, they anticipate that their salaries will double or will triple next day. Mm-hmm. So what was their rational behavior? Immediately, yes.
Just quick question. You use the term gray part of the society. And do I understand it correct that you said it's essentially like more than 80%? Is that what Karl Marx would call maybe the lumpen proletariat? And sorry for lack of a better word, I like your word better, gray part of society. But do you know if this gray part of society in Armenia is more or less compared to other countries in the region, and how is that affecting the revolutionary trends?
That's a very good question. And the scholars, what they found in their studies, usually there is a similarity, more or less. This proportion of the overall number of society, overall your society, is more or less the same in many countries. The point here that I'm trying to make, how you lead the expectation of this society. And this is how the leaders for our Velvet Revolution, how they manage this expectation, and through the power of this gray sector, they make changes of the power. That's more or less is similar in Latin America. 75% to 77% was counted in Latin America. In Ukraine is 82. So, but the average of overall this is more or less from 80 to 85%. So that's we need to bear in mind. And why they call gray society? This terminology is not my terminology, by the way. It's a scholar's terminology. And why they say, because their expectation is extremely different. They do not coincide with the expectation of prosperity of your country. They don't want prosperity. That's why if you look, many people what they participated in this revolution, when government is just toughening the condition, penalizing, they say, come on, why you are penalizing me? I didn't make this revolution in order to penalize. I didn't make this revolution in order to pay taxes. I don't want to pay taxes. I don't want to serve my debt. Okay, yes. So that's the expectation. And what they did, this is the most important thing. Immediately, they go and try to expand their consumption. But because their income did not catch up their consumption, because immediately they think that, tomorrow Nikol Pashinyan will just redistribute the wealth, and they will have another source of income, and they will pay all that debt. Or because Nikol Pashinyan promised that to forgive all the credits, what's the big deal? I will take additional credit, and tomorrow Nikol Pashinyan will forgive. Will just with a stick will force the banks.
Wand. Yeah.
Yes, will force the banks, and banks will forgive all my debt.
So I have a question. Does the Armenian consumer actually have more debt today than they used to in 2018, for example?
The point. That's the point that I'm trying to make. Let's look at the figure, because, unfortunately, Asbed, our statistical service, they do not publicize balance sheet of the household, like in US or in some European countries. They have such kind of statistics. But we can gauge about it. We can just have some kind of estimate or think about how their balance sheets were deteriorating. Because if you look, so mostly, do you agree with me that the middle and low income households, usually they have a single source of the income? These are just a salary.
Right.
Okay, they are not owners of the assets. Either it's a salary or a transfer that they are just receiving abroad. If you look to the transfer increase until 2020, and also salary increase, salary in real terms do not increase too much. But let's look to the consumer credit part. In the end of 2017, overall consumer credit was around 512 billion drams. Within 1 year, and let's not count 2 or 3 months for 2018, because the change of the government happened in the end of April and beginning of May. So within 1 and 8 months, this consumer credit almost doubled. It increased to 926 billion drams.
In just a little over a year and a half, you're saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It means that, the balance sheet deteriorated dramatically. But it's not the end of the story. The next part, what happened and what this government also supported this phenomena. In my time, when I was in a position of the Minister of Finance, I submitted to the Parliament a draft law in order to limit and the advertising, gambling, and casinos, and online such kind of gambling, so bettings, etc. Because if you just advertise within your local economy, it is going to create a further polarization. Because what is these betting houses or gambling? They just collect money from 1,000 people and redistribute within 10 people. And it's a very dangerous thing. What did this new government? They just called back my draft. Moreover, they opened the doors in front of these gambling houses and online betting houses. So You can find, if you look 2018, 19, 20, 21, there was just floated in different sites about the advertisement, even through the TV during the daytime. What it created? Now let's go back again to these households. They have a deterioration in their balance sheets. Income is not increasing, and they have to service their debt, right? What they do? Usually they go in these circumstances. There is another branch in academic literature. You can find a lot of studies arguing that, why, in what circumstances these bettings or the turnover in these gambling and casinos go up when the social position of the household deteriorated, and they won't just throw the betting or throw something to just won a big price and the money in order to service their debt. But indeed, it further deteriorated their condition, their social well-being. And just recalling the numbers that the Deputy Minister of Finance he voiced during the parliamentary hearing, it was the year 2023. In 2022, you know how much bettings, the turnover of these bettings is 5,200,000,000,000 drams.
Okay. So that's like more than 10, yeah.
More than the $10 billion. Do you know?
Okay.
So let's, for your comparison, just bear in mind, it was around $100 million to $200 million before.
And obviously,
these
are not rich tourists coming to Armenia and
absolutely,
like Monaco and
absolutely
leaving their money in the casinos, right? It's
absolutely because and what did happen? So if let's put together deterioration in their balance sheets because of the increase in the consumer credit, further deterioration because of the participating in the gambling and the bettings. In the end of the day, that's why their social condition or social welfare or well-being deteriorated dramatically. That's why if you approach, and plus we have also in 2021-22, we have average inflation around 7 to 8.6%, which is pretty high. And then only it recedes during the course year of 2023, right? And if we put all these three factors together, deteriorating balance sheets because of the consumer credit, deterioration of the balance sheet because of the participating in the gambling, and deterioration their balance sheet because of the high inflation. That's why if you approach to the mid-level, say the participant of the society in terms of the income, they will say, inflation is very high. And this is because they have to spend more on different things, and their social welfare deteriorated dramatically. That's the answer, what happens in Armenia.
So what are the key factors that affect inflationary and deflationary pressures in the Armenian economy? For example, in the US, housing shortages or wage inflation can lead to prolonged inflationary trends. Is the Armenian economy similar to a developed economy like the US? What factors are major influencers in Armenia?
Actually, in our economy, currently, if we look at the inflationary environment, is quite modest, being very frank, because the average inflation, which is the right figure to look at from a perspective of the households, is only 1.4% during the first 7 months. That's why it's modest. Central bank is doing the right thing of this aspect, but most importantly, the key factor that have influence on an inflationary environment is exchange rate, because exchange rate appreciated, and key part of our inflation during the course of the years 2021 and 22. Mostly it was imported inflation, imported from the outside. That's why exchange rate appreciation is a good news for the households, being very frank. It absorbs this bad effect from import prices, from imported inflation. Another aspect is that in any matter, central bank is trying to control the environment with this interest rates policy. But I'm going to cover these aspects as well, because I think some kind of shortcomings and I will say weaknesses in their policies we need to acknowledge as well because my understanding still we could have lower inflationary environment plus slightly higher the nominal exchange rate in order not to harm tradable sector with if monetary policy and fiscal policy they used to do a much more advanced coordination, which when they failed to do that. And that's that impact is on our economy. But that's another part we will speak about it when we will cover the real economy.
So let's move to monetary policy. In July, the Armenian central bank lowered the refinancing rate to 7.5%. Meanwhile, the Dram has appreciated from the start of the year when it was around 405 to the dollar to 387 to the dollar, around 4.7% appreciation. So let's begin with the refinancing rate. I'd like to understand, first of all, how important of a indicator this is, and is a refinancing rate of 7.75% optimal for economic growth in Armenia?
I don't think, in order to tell about whether it is optimal or not, you need to count different factors, your macroeconomic environment. What are the key factors behind it? Whether you have a threat coming from a demand side or you have a threat coming from a supply side, what is the structure of your economic growth? So there are different factors on there. I think we need to put on another way, whether central bank's policy is prudent and whether he managed to bring down the inflation. As I said, let's begin from the point that currently the central bank is following inflation targeting regime. So key regime of central bank is inflation, which means inflation targeting, which means that they are just trying to reach their goal containing the inflation and keeping it within the band 4 plus minus 1.5 percentage points for the interest rate. Now we need to think about whether interest rate transmission mechanism is quite effective or not.
Can you describe a little bit more what is the inflation rate transmission mechanism? What do you mean by that?
Interest rate transmission mechanism.
Yes,
interest rate. So look, central banks usually have a final goal, and final goal is the inflation, right? So how they reach their final goal, how they contain inflation, how they manage this inflation and to keep within their target, there's 4%, right? There are different tools. You can just reach to this by utilizing looking to the money base, which is a quantitative, let's say, targeting. You are just looking how much money is in the circulation. What is your money base? What is the money mass? How you just, by managing this money base and money base, you just reach your final goal, which is the inflation. Since the year 2000, there was a new wave in monetary economics, which is called inflation targeting, because many scholars and many central banks, they adjust it and they just switch it to another regime, saying that, already money base, they do not effectively react to the inflation. Because with a controlling money base, I cannot reach to my final goal. More importantly, I need to manage inflation expectation, and the inflation expectation I need to control via interest rates. When we say transmission mechanism, it means that how central banks' behavior or change of the behavior affects the inflation. So this transmission mechanism, either it can be through the interest rate, the central bank increase the interest rate, it transforms to the interest rate of the banks. Banks also adjust their interest rate and it transform to the real economy. Okay, this is one channel. Another channel is, as I said, money base. The third channel can be exchange rate. When you are trying to indirectly affect the exchange rate and it transforms to your inflation. I think no matter that we have an inflation targeting regime and main instrument controlling inflation is interest rate, still, because we are a dollarized economy, still this transmission weakness is comparatively weak compared to the exchange rate transmission mechanism. Because as I said, how central banks succeed during the year 2020 to 23 to bring down the inflation more is through the exchange rate channel rather than compared to the interest rate channel. No matter that.
One quick question. You said indirectly affecting the exchange rate. Do you mean that the central bank tries to affect the exchange rate of the dram to the dollar or whatever to foreign currency?
No,
it's part of their policy.
I will explain.
No? Yeah.
I will explain. That's a very good question. Usually, when you adopt inflation targeting regime, you need to allow exchange rate to be in a fluctuation. You should not. Yes, it should be floating exchange rate regime or managed float, as Guillermo Calvo used to say. Managed floating, it means usually it's keen for the economies where we have a dollarized environment. For instance, in the financial sector or in the real sector, more or less we have a dollarized economy. That's why still exchange rate plays a vital role. Central banks usually during the inflation targeting regime, they do not pay attention to the exchange rate, and this is the right thing. However, during the shock, Hovik, now pay attention. During the shock, you need to be careful because in the end of the day, let's go back and think about it, ask the philosophical question. Why central banks' final goal is price stability? Why they need to ensure price stability? And the answer is very simple. Because price stability ensures sustainability of your future economic growth. Because it strengthens the basis for your future economic growth, right? Because if you have a stable inflationary environment, then participants of the real sector, which are economic agents or let's say businesses, they can more effectively create new value added, new products or services. If there is an high inflationary expectation, there is a chaotic environment, and of course it's a problem. That's why during the shocks, you need to also not have a myopic view, just containing inflation within the short-term period. You need also to be careful not to break the fundamentals of your economy. That's why in academic literature, many scholars and many professionals, they advocated during the economic shock, central bank must advance with the government, and the government must support central bank in terms of reaching their ultimate goal. And coordination between the fiscal policy and monetary policy must be enhanced, must be advanced. And what they need to do, fiscal policy must be more aggressive to go and tax non-tradable sector, because this kind of positive shift where money is flowing your economy, it appears in a non-tradable sector. Non-tradable sector is the services, is a construction in a households, residential households, etc. So usually fiscal policy by taxing, must collect the money and withdraw this money from the economy, giving more spaces for a central bank to intervene and purchase more dollars, okay? And these dollars, but again, just absorbing the dollar, taking out this dollar from the economy, central bank also will not allow exchange rate to appreciate and harm your tradable sector. So this is just a two-actor play. And two actors must be very careful how they are managing this situation. Unfortunately, in our case, in the Armenian case, both central bank was left alone by the government, and government do not fulfill its duty appropriately. If you look to the from what sectors usually government collected taxes, mostly it's from a tradable sector. Look at the structure of or let's say 10,000 or 1,000 big taxpayers. Who are the 1,000 big taxpayers? Mostly it's a company that belong to the tradable sector. So they collect mostly from a tradable sector rather than going and taxing non-tradable sector. This is the first. And they do not tax enough or issue their bonds enough in order to just take out money from the economy in order to give a platform, to give a space to the central bank to intervene and to collect the additional or extra dollars or exchange that appeared in our economy. And by doing so, this called in economic jargon terrorization of it. And by doing so, they can hit the dual goal. From one hand, to contain inflation, and from another hand, not to allow exchange rate to appreciate very much. Now we have why our tradable sector is struggling. Because exchange rate, nominal and real exchange rate appreciated dramatically, harming tradable sector. And that's a problem. Now coming back to the key part, again, interest rate of the central bank, whether this is normal in the current situation, I think it is. And one good news for a central bank is doing forward-looking policy, and this is the right way to do that. If we go back to the year 2020, when many different central banks, they do not launch toughening monetary condition, increasing interest rate. Our central bank in the mid of 2020, they begin increasing the interest rates from 4.5 reaching to the 10.75. Unfortunately, as I said, this didn't transform one-to-one to the real sector because transmission mechanism of interest rate is relatively weak.
So a related question I had about the refinancing rate. Why is there such a big gap between the refinancing rate the central bank uses for commercial banks and then the consumer? What determines that? And we know that in countries such as France, Germany, and Japan, there is a relatively high amount of regulations that control how much banks can mark up the commercial interest rates. How would Armenia fare in this comparison of, let's say, regulation? And should there be more regulation in this aspect? Because sometimes we see very high interest rates that consumers end up paying.
Actually, Hovik, we also have such kind of regulation in Armenia, which says that you cannot give a credit to the consumers or economic agent, whatever it is going to be, which will be more in effective terms, including also commissions, etc., more than average banking interest rate, which is currently 12%. So it's basically you cannot grant a credit to the economic agent of a household which exceeds 24%. We also have such kind of provision in our legislation. However, if you look to the interest rate, it's very far that of the average interest rate or of the credit that is granted to the households and the economic agent is much more far from this 24%. Mostly the credit organizations, when they grant a credit to the households, they approach to this 24%. But still, central bank supervision is very tough on this. Now I will reformulate your question, because looking to the interest rate of the central bank when it goes down, I mean refinancing rate, and looking to the upper bound of the interest rate of the credit that goes to the economy, which is slightly increasing, why it happened? The answer is that we need to look to the structure of the credit. Because structure of the credit mostly is, and this is a bad news, because it goes to the households. It's mortgage plus consumer credit. And consumer credit, yes, and they are riskier. And if recalling what I just said, because banks are estimating, assessing credit worthiness of the households, they look to the also balance sheet. They are also doing the same examination, or I say analysis or exercise what I did, just looking, okay, these particular households from where it serves is consumption. What are the sources of income? And they also consider that consumer credits day by day is becoming much more riskier. That's why interest rates likely going up. Plus, also you can consider mortgages if you look what types of mortgages, because people usually take a mortgage in order to take houses or apartments, right? And it's also long-term consumption. Being very strong, it's not a business.
Right.
And in terms of this, there is also some kind of problem, riskiness that banks are assessing. That's why there is some kind of deterioration or distortion between the interest rate of the central bank and the interest of the bank's credit that they grant to the economic agents.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If you look, by the way, it was just a reverse situation during the course year of 2022, when central bank was increasing dramatically its interest rate, but interest rate of the credit to the real economy do not adjust it upward dramatically. Why it is so? Because banks, they have a lot of money coming in from other, they just mostly the big profit they created from non-interest income sources. Just commissions serving Russians, serving Ukrainians, because a lot of Russians and Ukrainians, they came to Armenia, they opened up an account and they paid for the bank services. Right?
Yeah, conversion of the money,
Yeah,
exactly.
and there was no sense, to increase the interest rate. That's why we have a reverse situation during the course year of 2022 and mid of 2023.
All right. So speaking of 2022 and the influx of Russian immigrants, which contributed to some of these things, it reminded me that in April, Armenian banks stopped servicing the Russian Mir payment system. The government also reported, and we don't know if this is related, which is one of my questions, it's a significant drop of remittances to Armenia this year. Money transfers from Russia decreased by 69.4%, while overall remittances this year have decreased by 48%. Can you tell us what you would attribute this drop in remittances to? Is it related to the processing of Mir payment system? And also, how does this affect the exchange rate for the Dram? Is that the cause for the appreciation of the Dram?
Hovik, quick answer is yes, limiting the service of a Mir payment, indeed, it plays a role in terms of, because, if you have a Mir system connected to your banking system, the transaction costs are going to be diminished. If you are just withdrawing Mir and no Mir cards will be serviced, of course, many our people that have cards that servicing that are connected to the Mir system, of course, it is going to have a negative effect for the transfer. But let's go back again to the year 2022. There was just a big shock. There was a boom of this money transfer. And why it wasn't? That, by the way, during the course year of the 2022, I was repeating that, this is a shock phenomenon and it is going to retreat. It is going to go down during the course year of 23 and 24. And this is what happened. And why it was a shock? Because during that time when, immediately you have a problem, an armed conflict or the war in this territory, usually households in the home country, home country, I refer to Russia and Ukraine. Household, usually they try to find a safe havens for their savings, right? Because, everything can happen. If you are close to this armed conflict territory, then bomb can damage your bank servers, and then something can be problematic. So these are just a way of thinking. Plus also the sanctions. And immediately when the first sanctions was introduced, immediately it signals to the household to diversify their savings, diversify in terms of the geography. That's why immediately it flooded some places. But because of the Armenia, also they limited the service of the Mir, some money, they do not come to Armenia. And this phenomenon was observed during the course of 2023, the second half, and it is continuing also for the year 2024. Again, just summarizing, there are two effects. The first, that we need to acknowledge that 2022 was a short year, and that's why there was an overshoot of the remittances. Now it is returning to its sustainable path, let's say. Okay. And the second effect is just limiting and blocking Russian banks from the overall banking system. It's also another problem.
As far as the drop in remittances are concerned, is there an actual drop, or is it just the amount that is being accounted for that has dropped? For example, has a bunch of it gone to direct and cash remittances instead of bank transfers?
Asbed, that could happen, but central bank did not observe such a phenomena in our economy because the transaction costs comparatively are very low. And key sources that we receive remittances is Russia. And if we look other sectors, for instance, other countries, remittances from other countries like US, Europe, it did not go down dramatically. Mostly it's because of the Russia. And already I covered that fact. And indeed, if you look to the money transfer for the banks of physical persons, which have a non-commercial purposes in 2023, have gone down, diminished by around 40%, additional 40%, more than 40%. We have during the course year of 2024. So it is just returning to its steady state situation.
Traditionally, a large number of Armenian men used to go to Russia to earn money each year and then return in the winter. My understanding is this may have changed recently because Russia introduced new immigration laws to limit the amount of time that people can stay in Russia and work. And at the same time, I think we're seeing more incoming laborers, specifically like Indian migrants who come to Armenia to work. So I just want to understand if these migration dynamics play any major role in the money flow in and out of Armenia and how they affect labor in Armenia.
Let's consider this issue from two perspectives. What type of workforce we hosted in our country during the course of 2022-23? Because the first phenomena is that now these migrants, including also Indian, they are leaving Armenia because of the overall economic condition or the inflationary environment or cost of living, let's say, comparatively is high in Yerevan compared to our region. And the economic activity, unfortunately, is much more concentrated in a region, in Yerevan and nearby region. For instance, in Georgia, it was much more diverse in terms of the region. You can earn money in Batumi, in Kutaisi, Tel Aviv, and it's not only based on Tbilisi is a key part, but you can see also a lot of economic activity elsewhere. Here, since the year 2018, by the way, it was a challenge before that as well. But since 2018, the situation was much more deteriorating. And it means that the prices, the cost of living in Yerevan and this district, where mostly economic activity is concentrated, is comparatively high and have been increased dramatically. Because much more you are concentrated in one sector, there is more demand, and prices usually for restaurants, for food, for renting apartment, it goes up. That's why if you look, let's take an apartment rent. It should be linked to the cost of the per quadrat meter for apartment, right? Look at in the centrum, how much it costs. More than $5,000. Look at in the Georgia. You can just purchase around 2,800 or even 3,000, not more, a fancy apartment per quadrat meter, by the way. It means that this kind of economic policy, we could not capture the positive sides of this immigration. Because not only illiterate, not skilled workforce like Indians visited Armenia and tried to replenish our workforce, but also we experienced influx of smart and skilled people from Russia, from belonging to IT sector, which now recalling and referring chairperson or central bank, almost 60% they left the country, and that's a problem. Right. We could not sustain this environment. We couldn't repeat the experience of Israel. Look for in 1990s, because Israel made a big progress in technology during the course of 1990s until the 2000. And why? Because after the collapse of the Soviet Union, many engineers, many mathematicians, technicians, they left Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and they just migrated to Israel.
Yeah, so they were able to absorb all of those.
Absolutely. We couldn't do that because of the unpopular and not right economic policy.
Vardan, you mentioned replenishing the workforce. Is there a labor shortage in Armenia, and what do you attribute that to?
When we are talking about the labor shortages, we need to consider what segment we are talking about. And indeed, the skilled sector, I will say there is a shortage, and this is what many businessmen they voice about it. And by the way, unfortunately, Azbek, after the war 2020, mostly I will say skilled people left country, left Armenia. Why skilled people? Because skilled people much more easier they find job elsewhere. Because they hold a master's degree from Illinois University, from Harvard University, and it's not a big deal to find a job as well. And this unpopular, let's say, economic and political course of the current government, when they just, if you do not share the views of current government, you can put in the jail immediately. Opening up, we have dozens of such kind of cases. Immediately they can open up a criminal case, and it doesn't matter what the law is saying. They can put it into the jail without any justice, without anything. And then the judicial process can be launched in order to show that we are democratic. But I will not consider that these are just a country with a democratic value. That's why skilled people usually they cannot find themselves in this environment, and that's why since 2020, when there is also some security risks that have been increased, and nobody can say that there is no problem with the security. There is a security risk, and unfortunately, it is much more bigger compared to before the change of the government. Many smart people, they left the country. That's why my answer will be mostly we have shortages of the smart and skilled people.
Last question on this topic. We know that traditionally Armenia has a big reliance on remittance. What are some realistic things that Armenia can do to get out of this remittance trap? Because it seems to be a significant factor on the Armenian economy. Maybe this is an open-ended question. I don't want it to be because we've been running the gamut of things here today. But do you believe that the level of remittances essentially right now is manageable? Let's begin with that question. And then if not, what do we need to do about it?
Hovik, we need to understand what do we mean by manageable. This is a very interesting question. We are talking about manageable in terms of the impact on our economy, in terms of the creating distortions, in terms of what?
Yeah, I guess I was thinking of in terms of risks to the economy, so that if one day it dries up, then we will not suffer too much.
Let me put on this way. The question is how sustainable are these remittances? If they are sustainable, no matter. And by the way, in academic literature, there are a lot of studies identifying the causes and the type of the remittances, whether they are pro-cyclical or counter-cyclical. If your types of remittances are counter-cyclical, then it's you should not be afraid of this. During the downturns, remittances go up because people have a strong linkages with your home country, with your motherland, and during the difficult situation, they just send money to their relatives. It can be helpful to sustain or to withstand the negative shock. If it's a vice versa, then it's a problem. But in general, the literature also it argues that more importantly, if you have a growth coming from a tradable sector, because remittances mostly they service non-tradable sector, and this is a problematic. And you are right. If something happened to these remittances, what we have experienced in 2008, 2009. Your economy is going to face with the hurdles and severe problem, and these are problematic. That's why if the leading factor for your economy is tradable sector, it's an industry, it's the agriculture, is those services that you can just sell abroad, then there is no room to worry. Unfortunately, again, coming back to the 2018, 2020, the economic policy course of a current government, no matter what they declare, there is no match what they do. And this is a problem. They declare that, the course of our economic policy is to favor the tradable sector. We should have export-led growth, but it's a fake, it's artificial. Because if you look to the export, somebody will say, we have an export growth around 40%, but let's look to the tradable sector. Do you produce enough goods and services to sell abroad? And if you look to the structure of your economy, then picture is very problematic. Why? Because, you can see that the tradable sector is struggling compared to the non-tradable sector. And you do not produce enough goods and services to sell it abroad. In that case, when somebody will ask from where this high export is coming, this mostly is linked to the Russian economy. And this re-export. And we should not be proud of that our export growth is 4%. If you just take out this re-export size, our export is going down. It's on negative trajectory. And that's a problem.
According to the current Minister of Finance, Hovik Manucharyan, Armenia recorded 10.4% economic growth in the first half of 2024. But he expects apparently that the full year 2024 growth will be closer to 6%. If you look at the month-over-month numbers, the growth rate is already slowing down. For our listeners, let me just quickly mention that we are putting a lot of links and references in our show notes. So please go to podcasts.groong.org and check the links. Vardan, what do you attribute the ongoing slowdown to in this economy?
Because those factors, Azbed, that play a vital role for your economic life during the 2020, 22 and 2023 is receding. And let's put it this way. In 2022, our economic growth was mostly led by the external factors. And external factors come from three sources. It was a remittances, as we communicate, or money transfer. It was a visitors growth, or tourism, let's put in the way. It was also the re-export. In 2023, if you look to the number of tourism or visitors, it slowed down dramatically. And the situation reversed during the first half of the 2024. For instance, visitors from Russia, the number of visitors goes down by 23%. It was just cut down. If you look to the remittances, already reversed. In 2023, it goes down by 44%. Additional 45% goes down during the first half of the year. If you look to the re-export mostly during the course year of 2022 and 2023, it was much more diversified because you sell also to Russians your export. Now in 2024, your export to Russia had been cut down by 21%. So basically, there's only one, let's say, pipe that we are breathing. It is a re-export of diamond, semi-precious stones, and precious metals. Now, let me just voice the number. During the first half of the year, around $5 billion comes from Russia and goes to Emirates and goes to Hong Kong. And these are only the re-export of semi-precious metal, precious and semi-precious metals and stones. And this way, my understanding is that for 10% is not a figure for economic growth, 10.3% is a figure for economic activity. If you look to the economic growth for the first half of the year, is slightly higher than 6%. I do believe that until the end of the year, if you just extrapolate what happened during the first half of the year, these tendencies will continue. If these tendencies continues, I anticipate that our economic growth for a base case will be around 5%. Economic growth, not economic activity index. because economic activity index it counts the physical turnover, while economic growth is count only value added. Because from a re-export, you have very negligible value added.
Yeah, we don't do anything to that gold, right? I don't even know if it physically goes through Armenia at this point.
Yeah, we just put a stamp and label it as Armenian gold, and we export to as Armenian gold to Emirate and to Hong Kong.
So I have a provocative question about this. Isn't this sanctions evasion? I'm sorry, I don't want to, people are going to say now we're sort of, why aren't the sanctions police noticing this?
Hovik, that's a business, we should not resent or that, or I don't so blame or criticize that, they are doing a bad thing. You can see a lot of European companies that are trying to find the ways how to make a business, even with the Russians, because their business are connected. Or let's take another way. Gas. Currently, democratic Europe is importing Russian gas via Azerbaijan. If you look to the Azeris export of gas, they do not have such a capacity of production. They do not. They just import Russian gas, rebranded the Russian gas to Azeris gas, non-sanctioned gas, and they export to Europe. And many European businessmen, they open up the door because their businesses are based on a gas, consumption of the gas.
At the minimum, it's a risk from a business perspective. It's a political risk for the country because
Absolutely.
It increases Armenia's exposure to foreign intervention if one day they decide to, increase the sanctions. I didn't mean it as criticism, but it just seems like I equally criticize Azerbaijan being used as a conduit for Russian gas for Europe. It just
Yeah.
Right. Everybody's in it. From my perspective, though, the rosy numbers that this re-export economy has given the opportunity to this government to cover a lot of weak spots in the various other sectors. Agriculture is suffering. There's a slowdown in the IT industry of about 13%. Armenian brandy is down. Tourism is down. These numbers are all down while the government is reporting rosy numbers. How do we make sure that the country understands where they are?
Asbed, you make a very important point. Indeed, government, I think the problem is that they're miscommunicating the real situation. They are just communicating rosy numbers. Somehow, governments, they have some kind of tilting toward presenting environment from a positive side. But we need to understand it's not just we have some weaknesses and we have some kind of also positive side in order to make that as we are in a very dangerous situation, because as you said, Azbek and Hovik also make remarks on this. If something happens with the re-export of this gold, our economy is going to suffer dramatically. We are going to see major deterioration in unemployment because immediately it will hit non-tradable sector. You have a positive shock, demand shock, non-tradable sector is blossoming. Non-tradable sector is blossoming, it absorbs more employment and workforce. More employment, people are happy. But tomorrow, if this factor vanish, you are going to have a big problems. Plus, government is going to face with a hurdle. Even now, government in its budget, it faces with a big problems. And I warned them, I urged them during when I was just making a public statements about what are the risks for the budget 2024. And I openly said, the structure of economy was very dangerous. And your tax collection plan is very ambitious. You are not going to collect such kind of taxes. And indeed, in the end of the day, you are going to force your tax collecting bodies, SRC, to change its behavior and to be more aggressive, to execute predatory policy. And this is currently what they are doing, opening up criminal cases to all businessmen and warning and frightening them and collecting money forcefully from this business. And this is what's going on in our economy. And this is very dangerous.
As you mentioned, that reminds me, the government has come under real criticism for poor planning of its capital and operational expenditures and revenues. You just mentioned that. There are large discrepancies, and the finance minister has tried to explain them away. But can you tell us what the reason is why the government is not hitting its marks in projected revenues and expenditures?
Because as I said, Asbed, on a revenue side, look, they put a target for 2024 in terms of the GDP, additional improvement in tax to GDP by 0.7 percentage points. They had an improvement during the course year of 2023 in tax to GDP ratio by 0.8%. But I warn them that, if you want to have a further improvement, because you cannot just go and improve your administration. There are some kind of limits to this administration. You need to go and change the rule of the game. You need to increase the tax rate. You need to cut down the exemptions. And they didn't do that, but they just put a target. While they have a problem in economic structure. And economic structure, economic growth is not taxable growth, as I said. Re-export is not so much taxable compared to the other sector, like a tradable sector, which you also voiced that in many sectors we are facing with the hurdles, and in these circumstances they fail to collect the taxes. Already during the first half of the year, they have shortages of their plan around 117 billion drams compared to the plan. And I think that during the first 9 months of the year, they are going to have a further deterioration in the tax collection. Coming to the expenditure side. In the expenditure side, there is another story. And another story is linked to the performance of the spending units, I mean the ministries. Because of the environment, when even negligible mistake any official is making, they can be arrested or criminal case can be opened. And there are tons of criminal cases opened in the prosecution office. It creates a rational behavior from an official side not to do anything, to avoid taking a decision, going and doing a procurement. That's why if you look to the procurement, single source procurement goes up dramatically after the year 2018. And that's why it's an explanation of why they all the time they put a target for capital expenditure and they underperform each time.
You were Minister of Finance. What is this reserve fund?
Quickly, I'll answer, just a small formulation. Reserve fund is a fund of the government because government must also during the course of the year must be some kind of flexibility. If something happened, I don't know, catastrophe happens or something.
For example, floods in the north?
Floods in the north, you need to have some money which is not linked to any program under in your pocket, so that you can just utilize.
So it's an emergency reserve.
Correct.
Okay, if it's an emergency reserve, why didn't they use it when they had floods in the north? And instead they were out in the international market finding loans or grants or international aid to help the people over there. And yet when they are not hitting their marks of their expenditures and their plans, they say everything is fine because we have a reserve fund to cover for that.
Asbed, I don't want to sound biased, but just recalling and referring many professionals for emergency situations, because they fire a lot of smart people from a government as they do not share this policy course, or they belong with their prospects to the Republicans or a former, they just fire these smart professionals. And the professionalism in the government went down dramatically. That's why many professionals, they say, they in advance, even in the northern part, this flood, they needed to do some kind of cautionary or some actions in order to protect people, which they didn't do that. Plus, now they fail also to do their business. They're just telling some kind of promises instead of taking robust and bold actions.
Mr. Aramyan, Armenia's national debt has recently hit around 12.5 billion US dollars. and it stands around 51% of our GDP, of Armenia's GDP. In fact, I hear that it is going to increase this year because the government has plans to borrow more. And in March of 2019, the national debt was around 5.5 billion, although then that was also a little bit over 50% of the GDP. So in terms of percentage of GDP, it hasn't increased that much. Is 50%, is this number a reliable indicator for the size of the Armenian economy, essentially,
I will
given the re-export?
Yeah, that's very good question. I will reformulate whether our debt is a sustainable trajectory and whether there are risks associated with our debt. Because looking to the nominal figure do not tell anything robust or anything useful. Because if you ask me, for instance, $10,000 debt, is it high or low? You need to answer this question compared to what? Compared to, let's say, Elon Musk, it's just a one-day cost, for example. But compared to anybody who has a salary or monthly salary, $1,000 is quite a high. That's why we need to look at the structure, whether government have enough resources and enough sources to service its debt obligation. And here we need to look at what is the performance of the revenue side and what is the performance of economy. On the economy side, as we already talked about major vulnerability in the economy side. On a collection part, again, we also acknowledge and we voiced about some concerns that government fell short compared to its plans, tax collections. And here is the bad news in terms of more tax. You are just underperforming, tax collection more underperforming, but you have a commitment on your expenditure. You cannot go and tell the pensioners or household that I'm not going to pay your salary or pensions, right? You have committed already. You need to do that. And from this perspective, we have a bad news in terms of the tax collection as well, which also have an association with the economic structure. There's also another bad news that more or less 50% of our debt are denominated in dollar terms, foreign terms. So if tomorrow there will be some kind of negative risks that will be materialized, resulting to the negative economic growth, it will have an immediate impact on our nominal exchange rate. Nominal exchange rate is going to depreciate. And like how we improved our debt to GDP ratio during the course of the year 2022 and 2023. With the same token, we are going to see deterioration in our debt to GDP ratio. Because if you are recalling the figures for 2022, we have a major improvement in our debt to GDP ratio for two factors. Higher than expected economic growth and GDP growth, and appreciation of an exchange rate. And immediately you can see that from 58%, we just dropped this figure to 47. I think that mostly if you ask what you will voice as a major concern and big threat to the servicing debt, I will say the economic structure. Because everything else is linked to this economic structure. Your tax collection, nominal exchange rate, everything is connected to this.
So when we say that Armenia's national debt is 50% of its GDP, we're using a GDP figure that includes re-export figures we discussed earlier, right? So does the GDP figure we're using for this purpose accurately represent the size of the Armenian economy?
You don't have anything else which is more reliable than GDP. You can do some kind of adjustment, Asbed.
Well, but if we're going to leave in all those fake billions from the re-export figures that don't do anything for the real economy, and these re-exports could one day just go away, right? Then Armenia's debt to GDP would skyrocket. Basically, we're saying there's a huge risk to Armenia's ability to pay its debt if that were to happen.
That's why we can say the following. Your debt to GDP, 50%, is lower than the threshold, the dangerous threshold, which is 60% on average as a rule of thumb for the developed world, right? Mm-hmm. But just looking to the zenith of or the causes or the factors contributing to this, you need to raise a red flag and say that, it's a 50%. You should not count on a 50%. It's dangerous. Because within a couple of days, this 50% can be converted to 60%. And you can breach this dangerous threshold.
Yeah, I'm concerned about that. One final question before we let you go. The S&P sovereign rating for Armenia remained unchanged at BB minus. What's your rating for the Armenian economy?
I think, this is something which many rating agencies have been criticized during the course of the year 2008 and 2009. If you remember, before that, they gave a high rating to Lehman Brothers and Azerbaijani collapse. And after the big this catastrophic downturn in all around the world, this financial crisis for 2009, these companies have been criticized. But still, I will not take the excuse, but their argument. They say that we are looking to the short-term liquidity, where the government is in a position to service debt. And looking to the government account, they say that they have enough money, let's say 400 billion in a central bank account. But the question is there, if tomorrow shock will intervene in your country, how severe this shock is going to be, and length of the shock also matters. If it stays in your economy only for 1 year, it's another story. If it stays for a long, there's no some kind of recovery, like what happened in Greece during the 2008, 8 and 9. In Greece, they have a negative economic growth 5 years on a consecutive basis, right? So the persistence of the shock can also matter here. That's why my understanding is that, by sovereign rating, they also one important, let's say, carte blanche for on their hands, because they say that each 6 months we are reviewing our ratings. And if we see some kind of urgency, we can immediately travel and within a couple of months change our rating. But still, I do not agree with that stable perspective when they say that your rating is a B minus or a B with stable prospects. Because our prospect very much is linked to a geopolitics.
Right. Obviously, when you talk about shocks to the economy, it's one thing to be Greece and have these various financial issues, and then you're Armenia and you have all these national security issues, and you could have war on your hand in a second.
I have to run.
All right. For today, let's leave it there. We thank you for all the time you spent with us today, and we will talk to you again soon, I hope.
Thank you, Mr. Aramyan.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thanks for having me.
That's our show today. This episode was recorded on September 10, 2024. We've been talking with Mr. Vardan Aramyan, who was Minister of Finance of the Republic of Armenia from 2016 to 2018. He is currently Senior VP of Finance and Economy at Valex Group in Yerevan. For more on Mr. Aramyan, please check our show notes at podcasts.groong.org. I'm Asbed Bedrossian.
And this is Hovik Manucharyan.
Please follow us on social media and follow us everywhere you get your Armenian news. The links are in the show notes. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.